This week on the Gabfest, the incredible on-the-record interview that Trump Chief of Staff Susie Wiles gave to Vanity Fair.
Quote from Wiles, "I hear stories from my predecessors about these seminal moments where you have to go in and tell the president what he wants to do is unconstitutional or will cost lives. I don't have that." I mean, that's incredible.
You have to have a sense of character that recognizes the difference between loyalty to your country and to your boss.
Can Trump talk you into feeling good about the economy?
It's all fixed because President Trump says it's fixed. It's all great, and we should all just stop complaining and take whatever we can afford for Christmas and be grateful.
I don't think I've ever seen a presidential speech in the White House like that.
Why are young Americans increasingly anti-Semitic?
I have raised my children to think of anti-Semitism in their lives as a pretty minor problem. Right now, I'm kind of rethinking some of that.
So the reason there's a distinct bulge in anti-Semitism is that it is both on the left and the right. Hello, and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest, December 18th, 2025. Susie Wiles is a sane enabler edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast. From the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School, Emily Bazelon in New Haven. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David. Hey, John.
And it's an interesting philosophical question, which is like, is John still the co-anchor of the CBS Evening News, or is he not? Because at the time you listen to this, your last episode might not have run. But by the time a lot of people listen to it, your last episode will have run, and you will no longer be that.
That liminal
it's a Schrodinger's
state.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a Schrodinger's cat.
Anchor. Yeah. Yes. Well, I think there's a kind of fitting. I think that's kind of fitting, since many Gabfest listeners have long questioned my feet firmly planted in what some people call legacy media, given that they know me from a completely different world. So there you go. We are experiencing it all together, everybody.
It is interesting. Anyway, by evening, by the time night falls, John Dickerson will just be an ordinary citizen of the city of New York, also known as Batman. This week on the Gabfest,
he will be engaging in cocktail mumble.
This week on the Gabfest, the incredible on-the-record interview that Trump Chief of Staff Susie Wiles gave to Vanity Fair. Then, what is going on with the economy? Why does Trump keep talking this way about the economy? What does the unemployment data tell us about the economy? Can Trump talk you into feeling good about the economy? Then, why are young Americans increasingly anti-Semitic? Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter, as well as the best Slate Plus bonus episode ever of all time. But you got to be a Slate Plus member to get that. We've got one more live show on our three-city 20th anniversary tour. We're going to be in my hometown of Washington, D.C. on February 11th at 7:30 p.m. at 6th and I. That's where we did our first live show back in 2009. We're so happy to be back there for yet another live show with them. So please come join us. We're going to have a great guest, and it's just going to be a wonderful, wonderful way to celebrate the Gabfest, to be together, and just be in a wonderful space. So can't wait to see you all on February 11th in DC at slate.com/GabfestLiveDC. Emily, what are you going to wear? Do you know yet?
I am not sure. I had a crisis about what to wear to the live show last week, so I'm going to try to avoid said crisis.
You look great. I regretted what I wore. I just saw the video of myself, and I was like, I shouldn't have worn that.
Oh, really?
I look like a potato, a blue potato.
That's not true.
I thought you looked fine. There's a great picture of you, I thought. So, yeah, you're fine.
Okay, well, that's nice. Thank you. We have not, to my recollection, talked at all about the Trump Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. I don't think we've talked about her on the Gabfest at all. Yet,
I didn't recognize her in the picture that ran with the profile. I was like, oh, that's what she looks like.
She has come out with the most vivid portrait of the Trump second term we've seen yet. Or actually, maybe the photographs that accompanied it were the most vivid portrait. For reasons opaque to me, she talked on the record with Chris Whipple, who's a writer who writes about chiefs of staff. And she perhaps thought it was for a book that might come out later. Whipple is working on a piece for Vanity Fair. And now her barely varnished commentary about the first year of the Trump second term is out. And it's got kind of everything you'd expect. You know, she's got Russ Vogt as a right-wing zealot, Trump she says has an alcoholic's personality, by which she means he thinks he can do anything. She that's what she means by it. She depicts Elon Musk as being out of control. J.D. Vance is totally politically opportunistic. John, did anything surprise you in this? Did you learn anything from this?
Yeah, that's the great. My reaction still pretty much is that this falls into the category of a Michael Kinsley Washington gaffe, which is not that you're surprised by it, but you're surprised by the person saying it, or that the person said something true, but they said it out loud, which you're not supposed to do. There's nothing surprising in those characterizations. What is surprising is that Susie Wiles, who has this reputation for, and well-earned reputation for, not seeking the limelight, not being on all the chat shows, essentially being a loyal behind-the-scenes figure, was broken. So now there are a couple of other things that the way in which she said them are, is poignant. I mean, particularly about getting rid of Maduro, basically blowing up boats until he's out of office. That's a pretty pointed way of talking about regime change. And so in that sense, it puts a finer definition on what we know to be the administration's policy. But the other thing I would say, and I have many reactions here about Chris Whipple and the chief of staff's job and so forth, but just at the top is that the portrait it paints of the White House is actually the thing that we should hang on to for history, because what it shows is a White House in which basically, shoot, ready, aim. I mean, in other words, it's basically more than any previous White House hitched up to the impulses of the chief executive, and the whole thing runs to entertain those impulses. To the extent that they are delayed, it's only to create the opportunity for those impulses to come into fruition, not to block them. And that's different both from the first term and also the chief of staff job as it's been conceived.
One interesting thing in Jamel Bouie's piece in the New York Times this week in response to this was he took a slightly different frame around it, which he was saying, yes, the impulses of the president are important, but actually what you realize is that there are these people who are effectively the president of what they want of their department. So Russ Vought is the president of government. If you wanted to do something in government, Trump doesn't care what's happening inside the Department of Education. I mean, he probably wants it gone, but he doesn't care like in any detail what's happening. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to get into the details around immigration. Stephen Miller does. And so you have these people who have vast powers because the president also is not really paying attention to what they do in any detailed way. So on the one hand, it's oriented to the whims of the president. On the other hand, the president only has whims about a certain amount of things, and there's vast areas where he doesn't have whims, or where his whims can be carried out by somebody who is really determined to dig in and bureaucratically make vast changes on their own without any accountability.
That was true of the first administration too. That he didn't care what he didn't care about, and so you could run freely. I think what's different is that there's no Reince Priebus trying to kind of manage him. There's no John Kelly trying to manage him, and so. This is somebody. So there are two things. There's one, Trump is basically like, I'm going to do it. You try and stop me. There was some cases in the first term, particularly around the attempt to overthrow the election, where actions by, say, officials at the Department of Justice, when they all threatened to resign, slowed him. There's no inclination to feel slowed. And the chief of staff, who is in the position to slow a president, has no interest in doing it. It's has interest only in hastening the effectiveness of those impulses. Tactically, there might be some instances in which she might want to slow him down so that you get a better, cleaner shot later. But it's not, oh, this is the wrong thing to do.
The quote in the piece that jumped out at me the most is, this is in Whipple's voice. Wiles told me in March she had difficult conversations with Trump every day. Quote from Wiles, "They're over little things, not big. I hear stories from my predecessors about these seminal moments where you have to go in and tell the president what he wants to do is unconstitutional or will cost lives. I don't have that." I mean, that's incredible, because this is the president who wants to do the most unconstitutional things and often cost lives, like literally, as we're seeing with the bombings of these boats. And she's just not playing the role of trying to slow or stop, right? It's like not how she sees her job.
When I was working on the Office of the Chief of Staff for my book, I interviewed Josh Bolton, who said that, there are two kinds of chiefs of staff. There's the ones that serve the president and the ones that serve the presidency. And that actually, that's not right. There's a continuum. And you always obviously have to serve the president. The president was elected. It's part of the democratic process. He's your boss. You owe loyalty. That's necessary to get stuff done. But it is not absolute. At some point, your job is to, as a constitutional in a constitutional office, is to have some understanding of the system of government, not just for what's effective by the whims of the president, but what is right by the Constitution and the people.
She is his employee, and she is the chief of staff. It's really her job to do what he wants. And then I was like, surely the chief of staff doesn't take an oath to the Constitution. And so I Googled it, and I was like, oh my goodness, the chief of staff takes an oath to the Constitution. They're not a personal employee of the president. They're an employee of the U.S. government to serve the U.S. Constitution in the same way.
This is why character comes into the job, and it comes into all these jobs, is that you have to have a sense of character that recognizes the difference between loyalty to your country and to your boss. And that if everybody has that, it helps retain some of these norms. It helps support a constitution so that it's not always a 100% stress test of everything. But the president is engaged in and wants to have a 100% stress test of everything. And so this is a chief of staff who fits perfectly with that worldview. And that's it. That even Haldeman, or maybe not even Haldeman, particularly Haldeman, right, who helped Richard Nixon do a lot of things that broke norms and broke laws, nevertheless had a view of the job and its role in a constitutional system that was not just about Richard Nixon. In fact, there's a great line from Kissinger that Watergate is the result of the president saying something and some fool listening to him. In other words, there was an obligation to not just listen to everything the president said.
I've been watching a lot of shows set in the past and sort of upstairs, downstairs shows. So the show Rome, Gilded Age, Downton Abbey fits this. Been watching a little bit of Victoria, which is a terrible new Netflix show, which is kind of like The Crown crossed with the Gilded Age. But there's this interesting idea of the servant. The servant is not so you think of a chief of staff as having sort of a huge amount of agency and responsibility, and Susie Wiles is treating her role as that of a servant, and it's unsettling because a servant is not there to pass judgment on what their employer is doing, what their master is doing. They're just to carry it out and to do it, and they can have a private life, and in their private life they can express thoughts and feelings, but in the moment, in the kind of work, you just are a servant. And I think it's not a very American way of doing things, but it's something that Trump clearly likes. Trump clearly wants people to act like servants.
She is the perfect person for Trump. It also fits with the kind of legal perspective, right, of the administration, that the president himself is the entire executive branch. I started reading the profile, kind of trying to suss out her policy views, like to figure out where she actually objected or was cheering him on. And then I just got really tired of doing that because I realized that
who cares?
Doesn't matter. Totally. And also that there was this weird deflection going on where at certain moments she would sort of say like, oh yeah, USAID, that was terrible. But it wasn't like she was ever going to do anything about any of it. So it was irrelevant. And also I started feeling suspicious that she was kind of performing at certain moments, kind of pretending that she actually objected to something, like Elon Musk and all of the Doge cuts. And then I decided actually, like, in the end, it just seemed as if the things she objected to were things that made the administration look bad, as opposed to actually she thought were bad.
I don't want to like both sides. I don't want to devil's advocate for her. But look, this is by many measures the most effective presidency we've seen in our lifetimes. Like it's in terms of getting what it wants done. And it also hasn't really fallen apart in recrimination. There hasn't been this yet, the embarrassing spectacle of people leaving and talking shit about the president the way there was. And, you had Rex Tillerson or John Kelly, like that, just this sense that the adults were shaming the president, leaving and shaming, and that hasn't happened yet. So isn't there a case that actually this is a very effective kind of chief of staffness for this kind of president?
It depends what you mean by effective. If it's in the Mussolini made the trains run on time kind of effective, in which you detach it from the normal moral guardrails, then yes. And particularly, there's no question that on the question of going after migrants in the United States, it has been quite effective. But when you add the moral piece, that effectiveness takes on, a darker hue when American citizens are wrestled to the ground for just looking the wrong, not having the right color skin. When the judicial system is used, as she mentioned in the piece, and again, this is an instance in which it's obvious to anybody looking that the president is using the judicial system as a serial act of retribution on people. But when she says it sharpens the moment. So yes, effective, but that completely deletes the moral component of it. And also, I should say, even by the lights of the president's own claims, and we'll talk about this in the economic section, but I mean, not effective in applying the same kind of attention to the other number one issue. There can't be two, but the other major issue the president was elected on and talks about all the time, which is trying to deliver a greater economic opportunity to people who aren't, in the protected class. Instead, his White House has helped the protected class and not done so much for the rest of the country.
I want to finish on the interesting fact that there's basically been no consequence as yet for Wiles from this, that she seems to have been careless. She seems to have been unalert to what this might mean, that this might come out. But she has not been hung out to dry at all by Trump or by other people in the administration. Why is that?
Well, I think it's because we should also talk about why we think that she said all of this on the record. I think because she is extremely effective in dealing with a previous chief of staff talked about trying to manage Donald Trump as like being able to, trying to manage a hurricane. All the other departments need the president to be focused on something other than them a lot of the times so that they can do whatever it is that they want to do. Presidential focus is not a benefit in a lot of cases with Donald Trump. In other administrations, you want presidential focus to get attention for the things you're doing. Trump tends to meddle and make things crazy at times. So she, I think, is quite effective with him, and is trusted. Although I wonder in this case if she helped get everybody to be on board with those photographs, which they may not think they are most flatteringly portrayed in. But can I just say one quick thing about, J.D. Vance and others make a very strong and persuasive case that he's elected by the president and, should be able to do essentially what he wants. And how dare a chief of staff try to impose themselves between the people's will and those actions they voted for. And maybe. I think, obviously, I've made the case for why constitutional principle is important. But there's also a substantive reason, which is that a strong chief of staff, and Susie Wiles is right, I've talked to chiefs of staff going all the way back to Ford, I guess, and they all said the most important thing a chief of staff needs to do is come in and tell the president no when the president needs to hear no. Literally, like they all said that when I asked them what's the most important job of the chief of staff. And that in this instance would mean saying, Mr. President, people in this country who voted for you are hurting, and your tariff programs are going to hurt them more. And Mr. President, apply the kind of attention and passion you have for getting rid of migrants in this country towards trying to create economic opportunity for people who are getting smashed now and who are going to get totally smashed by the artificial intelligence revolution. And these policies that you've created to create more manufacturing, it isn't working. The jobs are going down. The wages are going down. The robots are winning. This is what you said you believed in. It's what they voted for. You need to use all of your energy to fix that. That's a way in which a chief of staff sort of saves the president from himself in a way that isn't framed as J.D. Vance frames it.
So the president went on television. He stole the attention of the American public, grabbed the networks for 20 minutes on Wednesday night to give an important economic address, an important address. And it was loud, it was fast, it was filled with lies, and he was attempting to
Shouty.
Shouty, attempting to jawbone Americans into thinking that the economy is in better shape than it is, and that insofar as it's not in good shape, it's Biden's fault, and insofar as it is in good shape, it's in better shape than people will allow. This comes on the heels of new unemployment data coming out this week, and the unemployment data was a mixed bag. 2 months of data at once because of the shutdown. They released both October and November data showing job losses in October, and then about 60,000 jobs added in November. The unemployment rate up at 4.6%, which I think is a 4-year high. And when you dig into the unemployment data, as John was just hinting at, the areas where there's been growth are in education, healthcare, local government, and then there have been declines in federal government employment, which certainly the Trump folks are in favor of, but also in manufacturing, mining, and logging, which are areas which they really emphasized. So, Emily, now that President Trump has given a speech on the economy, do you feel good about the economy?
It's all fixed because President Trump says it's fixed. It's all great, and we should all just stop complaining and take whatever we can afford for Christmas and be grateful. I mean, look, I think one thing that seems particularly glaring right now is that manufacturing jobs were down, as you just said, and this was supposed to be this great boom from the tariffs that is completely not materialized. The sort of, sunny side up way of thinking about this for Republicans is that the tax breaks that they have so ardently campaigned for will go into effect next year, and maybe that will create business investment. And then there will be this hiring, these gains, these fatter paychecks that are being promised. That's the kind of, maybe gold at the end of the rainbow. The problem, though, is that the tariffs are hurting the economy. The push to, really, really crack down on immigration seems to also be hurting the economy. And one irony of all of this is that if the Supreme Court ends the tariffs with the ruling that, we're expecting in the next few months about the legality of the tariffs, that could actually be a boon to the Trump administration, even though Trump will, curse and shake his fist at them. So there's that dynamic to consider, I suppose, in all of this. But mostly, like, when you're the president and people don't see the benefits that you promised them, yelling at them about it probably isn't effective.
There was a way in which this speech felt like the foreigner in a country where his solution to the fact that nobody can understand him is to speak more loudly in his own language.
Works really well, always.
I think the president is.
You should just stop there.
I think the president's case is undermined, and one should go watch this because
One should not.
I don't think I've ever seen a presidential speech in the White House like that. Just the way in which just the delivery was asynchronous with the context, and it undermined his problem, as his rally speeches on the economy undermine his problem. It's a way in which form mismatches function here. In rallies, the president wanders all over the place. He calls it a weave. Most people would say it's kind of a pinballing free association. That's entertaining to people in his base, but it also is the exact representation of what he's being accused of, which is that he can't focus on the economy or hasn't focused on the economy. We know what presidential focus looks like from Donald Trump. It's called immigration. Imagine if he had the same focus on the economy. Usually presidents who can't turn around the economy, because presidents can't, unless they do something like his tariffs policy, which does have an effect on the economy that's greater than previous presidents. But when they can't turn around the economy, they want to get caught trying. They want to get look like they're doing a lot of stuff for the economy. Trump mostly just asserts a lot of things which, upon the basic easy fact checking, are entirely untrue. So, I mean, just constantly untrue. His first claim was that prices are the highest they've been in 48 years. I mean, he went from zero to a lie in like under 10 seconds in the speech. Okay, when they were high in the Biden administration, they weren't the highest in 48 years. They were the highest in 40 years, but they aren't the highest, and they weren't in January. in 40 years. They were at about 3%, which is what the year-over-year number for September was. So inflation was where it is now. So his claims that he's bringing prices down are wrong. His claims that prices were at a historic level when he took over, those are also just totally wrong. And the speech was just full of easily verifiable facts that at this point, when you repeat them, have to be considered straight up lies. And then finally, as Emily was saying, you can't just convince people that things are going great for them if they don't feel it. And he knows that because he watched Joe Biden try to do it. And he convinced voters to listen to their present concerns more than any past fears they might have about Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump finds him in the position of saying to people, ignore your present fears. Remember how bad things were in 2022. That's a tough political thing to do.
I haven't bothered to dig into the actual details of this or figure out the legality, so I'm going to ask you guys for it. But so it sounds like he's giving every member of the military $1,776, and then he also proposes to give all American households below a certain income threshold $2,000. Can he do that? Is that legal? Like, did he actually issue a bunch of checks to the military? And if so, how did that happen? And is that legal? And could he, without congressional approval, just give people $2,000 tax rebate? And I don't know what it is. It's conjured out of nowhere.
Yeah, we're back in the land of the opposite of rescissions, right? Where you take money that Congress hasn't necessarily appropriated for a purpose and you just spend it anyway. This happened during the shutdown to some degree with paying the military, and they claim to be moving around different pots of money. So when people ask questions about this, the Trump administration will come up with some discretionary part of the budget that they'll just use for this purpose. And the question will be whether someone sues, because the positive nature of paying the military or sending other people checks means that there isn't often a constituency for saying, hey, wait a second, why is this in your power, especially from this Congress, which, is, as we know, utterly supine, this Republican majority. But it is an excellent question.
The Pentagon can shuffle around the money, but the money, I believe, the $2.4 billion that will be required to pay these checks will have to come out of something else. So some other spending as a part of the Pentagon budget will not get done. The $2,000 checks, I don't think he can do because it requires Congress. And we should also just stop the record player here and say that an economic policy that taxes people and corporations, which is what tariffs are, they're import taxes. So they've taken in a bunch of money from people and American corporations, and then now are returning checks to some of those people, is not, strictly speaking, a straightforward economic policy. And this is further demonstrated by the fact that you also have the president saying there's so much tariff revenue coming in, we're likely to get rid of the income tax, while at the same time his Treasury Secretary is saying the revenue that's coming in from tariffs will be temporary. And what will happen that will lead to economic growth and glory in America is that so much manufacturing and American economic activity will be reshored in America that tariffs will essentially go away, says the Treasury Secretary, and that revenue to the Treasury will come from income taxes and corporate taxes. So they are both saying the directly opposite things about what tariffs are going to do. This is just one of the ways in which tariffs are both a dessert topping and a floor wax in the way the administration talks about them. So people are not wrong for being confused about the economic policy that seems inconsistent with the way they live their lives. And all of those inconsistencies continue to play out in the way the president talks about the economy.
Not to mention that I thought Republicans didn't just write checks to people. They had more efficient ideas about not collecting the taxes in the first place, rather than creating all the friction of collecting them and then supposedly returning them. Not to mention that this is also supposed to make up for the giant price hikes for health insurance that lots of people are experiencing as we speak.
Perfectly said. And I would also add that one of the other things that that the tariffs have been claimed to do, in addition to helping with your phlebitis, is that they are going to, because there's so much revenue coming in from tariffs, it's going to shrink the deficit. So it can't do that if it's also going out as, and by the way, the $2,000 as the president has proposed it is more than is coming in increased tariff revenue
You know what this reminds me of? Every year I like do some speaking gig where I get paid
Yes,
unexpectedly, and then
yes, and then you spend
I
it.
spend that amount of money like 10 times over the year.
Yes,
Every time I want
yes,
something that
yes,
I like is, frivolous or whatever, I say to my husband, like, oh, it's fine. That speaking
yes.
fee I wasn't expecting covered that. He's like, we've spent that like 6
Right,
times. Anyway.
right. Well, it's like when you see something that's on sale for 50% off, and you're like, well, it's free because I saved. So it's $500, but it's on sale for
Actually,
$250. I paid $250, but I saved $250
right.
because
As
it's on
opposed
sale for $250,
to
so it was free.
who needed it all. Right. And we are just humble consumers, right? Doing our best to keep the American economy chugging along. This is the entire federal government with billions of dollars in this kind of overspending.
The Bondi Beach terror attack has renewed focus on anti-Semitism in Australia, but also has coincided with a lot of American commentators fretting about anti-Semitism in the U.S. There's a fascinating article in The Atlantic by Yair Rosenberg about an increase in anti-Semitism, a surge in anti-Semitism among the young. According to Rosenberg's data and a bunch of different kinds of surveys done by seemingly reputable people, young people are vastly more likely to say they hold, and not just hold, but express anti-Semitic views than older people, 4 times as much as people in their 60s. A quarter of young people say Jewish people have too much power, and a quarter of young people have negative views of Jewish people. And it's coming from the left and the right. And this is causing a lot of anxiety among American Jews. So
discuss.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things here. A, it's identifying a real phenomenon, and B, where do you locate that phenomenon coming from?
I'm wrestling with so many things. So one of the things I'm wrestling with is I have raised my children to think of anti-Semitism in their lives as a pretty minor problem. Like, okay, yes, it's there. I'm not a denialist about it, but there are lots of people in our country and elsewhere who suffer much more than Jews tend to suffer because of the economic relative affluence that Jews tend to have in this country in particular. And so I just like a little bit bridle at putting it at the top of the list. Right now, I'm kind of rethinking some of that. It just feels, I have a sense of unease, and it is from the right and the left. There's like a horseshoe going on, right? There's like the Nick Fuentes crowd on the right, and then there are people on the left who I think really do have a sense of collective punishment about the war on Gaza, and where, I think it's super important to be able to criticize the state of Israel in all kinds of ways. I share in a lot of those criticisms, but sometimes it does start to kind of blur and bleed into condemning Jews and Jewish power. So that I think is all important to kind of, at least for me, get out on the table. I also am really, I really object to the sort of obvious, like, straight causal, this is to blame for that. And again, this is on both the right and the left. So Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, said that, the Bondi massacre was because Australia had recognized Palestinian statehood. I mean, there's just no evidence for that. There were ISIS flags in the car of the 2 shooters. But like, that's such an abstract step that Australia took. I just really question that one. On the other hand, I get really worried about the idea that, we're like, how do we talk about Jewish economic power without straying into this territory of making people feel like there's this conspiracy. And I really don't like that either. And I also think the denying on the left that there's any tie at all between, globalize the Intifada and violence against Jews. That also just seems like too much to me, even though I don't want to make this sort of straight line causal attribution either.
I mean, I was noticing this kind of form of hypocrisy, which is that there's a lot of people say you cannot blame. It is absolutely wrong to blame Israel and Israeli policies for a surge in anti-Semitism. This is hate. This is nothing. This has nothing to do with Israel. It has to do with Jews. It's hatred of Jews, and you can't say that Israel is causing it to grow. It's some other poison. At the same time, they look at the Bondi Beach attack, as you said, and they blame it on Australia supporting Palestinian statehood. So you can say state policies about Palestinians can, the support for Palestinians can fuel anti-Semitism, but Israel's policies cannot be held responsible for helping to fuel anti-Semitism. It makes no sense.
Right. The causal line in one place is direct with do not pass go, and in another, oh no, it's all very diffuse. What did you guys make of, I think of this in the context of Vice President Vance, who both highlighted the idea that this is not an age thing, but it's a foreign-born, that the rise in anti-Semitism among younger people is explained by, it is happening. We should also put it in context. In other words, that anti-Semitism is still relatively small around the population, but it's getting bigger. And to the extent it's getting bigger among younger people. And J.D. Vance pointed to this work by Charles Fane Lehman, I guess his name is, which shows that it's that the uptick in younger people comes, that it's not about age, but about being foreign born. So what did you think about that analysis of the data? And then, to me, whatever you think about the analysis of the data, the vice president went and did what you two were just describing, which he said the most significant single thing you could do to eliminate anti-Semitism and any other kind of ethnic hatred is to support our efforts to lower immigration, which is just cockamamie. And because even if you believe that foreign-born is related to this uptick in anti-Semitism, it's a diagnosis that is just way overblown.
I haven't looked at that data, but it's clear like the anti-Semitism on the right is not driven by a rise in immigration on the right, people on the right who are immigrants who are anti-Semitic. The anti-Semitism on the right is driven by Groyperism, Nick Fuentes, the general toxicity of the internet environment, the general sense of being transgressive.
The kind of behavior the vice president made apologies for and excuses for when it came out in those chat groups of Republicans speaking fluidly about anti-Semitism.
I mean, one of the things I would love to see, which is that, so the reason there's a distinct bulge in anti-Semitism, right, is that it is both on the left and the right.
Yes.
So, but if you looked at other forms of nasty behavior, if you looked at racism, if you looked at anti-transism, if you looked at sort of general misogyny, I think you would see it on the right, but you wouldn't see it on the left. So it's weird. The anti-Semitism is this weird anomaly, which is the one form of kind of otherizing hatred that is shared on left and right. And the reason it's shared on the left is really comes out primarily, I think, because of, maybe not primarily, but significantly because of how terrible the Gaza war was.
I mean, right, like without falling into the reductionist trap, when you think about this rise among young people, it would seem crazy not to think about all the pictures of destruction and death in Gaza, right? I mean, they whip all over social media. They have completely changed Israel's image around the world. And I think especially among younger people, because it makes sense that younger people don't have the earlier, kind of prouder, like pro-Zionist image of Israel in their head. And also they're farther away from the Holocaust, which I think cast a shadow that made a lot of non-Jews reluctant to express or in any way support anti-Semitism or criticize Jewish power, because that ended just so incredibly disastrously. And for a long time, nobody wanted to be associated with that. Now, of course, we have this like strand on the right that is kind of like pro-Nazi, unbelievably. So that part of the generational story kind of makes sense to me, though I wish it wasn't so.
I mean, I just feel like when you focus this discussion on anti-Semitism, it allows you to buy off the right, because it says, oh, this is a problem in society that is universal. But actually what there's a problem which is overwhelmingly on the right, which is driven by these charismatic haters like Nick Fuentes, where anti-Semitism is a piece of it, but it's part of a just overall coarsening of society, an overall kind of otherizing of people who are different in any way, whether you're trans, whether you're gay, whether you're a woman, whether you're black, just this massive otherizing of all sorts of people. And by focusing on the anti-Semitic aspect of it, you can say, oh, this is the real issue because look, it's the right and the left, and therefore it's the biggest problem. But actually, the biggest problem is that there's a coarsening of overall society that is being driven by these grotesque figures on the right that is making hatred of all sorts palatable primarily for people on the right. And yes, there's a set of people on the left for whom hatred of Jews is now more palatable, but it is really just such a small subset of this massive thing that's happening on the right.
Yeah, I mean, it's also tangled up in whiteness, right? Like Nick Fuentes, one of the things he said in support of your point, David, is like, well, if we can hate all these other people, why can't we also hate the Jews? Like, basically trying to put them in the camp of othering that, on the right includes Muslims and people of color. And that is like destabilizing the idea that like, no, the Jews are in the group of like white people, i.e., majority more powerful. And then on the left, you have this idea of anti-Semitism because Jews are part of this white dominant group. And like you point to Israel, the example of it. And so there's a way, it's like a lose-lose, which is often true for Jews over time.
That instinct to otherize was what intrigued me about the vice president, who may or may not have any influence in this movement, but he is a spokesman for some of the currents coursing through it. And we remember, of course, the instance in which J.D. Vance made up stories about Haitians eating cats, and essentially admitted that while the stories were made up, it was important to get attention kind of in this broad way. So otherizing was a useful tool, and he sort of admitted that it was useful even when it's not real. So his response to these polls and this analysis is that people on the left have it all wrong, and that this is only about immigrants. In other words, otherizing the immigrants, which is a part of what you were describing, David, creates the conditions for anti-Semitism to exist. So it's a way in which he's using otherizing to explain. But if you're right, David, that otherizing also, in fact, creates the opportunity for more blaming of Jews for whatever the problems are. I should note that in that Charles Lehman, when I read through it, and I don't have a head for numbers, but it seemed that his argument was that the signal is directionally clear, that foreign-born status does correlate with higher rates of coldness towards Jewish people in those surveys, but that statistically it was still quite small. In other words, that only 1 in 10 foreign-born individuals had that coldness on that meter. And the reason I think that's important is that while he may have identified something, the response from people like J.D. Vance is to take that small signal and then use it to prescribe a huge, blunt response.
Let's go to cocktail chatter when you're having a huge, blunt response. When you're having a huge, blunt, what will you be chattering about, John Dickerson?
My chatter is first about a book called Natch by Daryl Kinsey, who won the prize from the Center of Fiction for first novels. It was just well written, well told, stuck in my mind, really. And then the other is that just other things that happen. A new recording was obtained by the New York Times of President Trump calling the Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives to basically encourage him to hold a special legislative session to overturn the president's election laws. We all know about the president's conversation with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, but this is just another instance in which the president was leaning on Georgia officials to overthrow the election and saying things that were verifiably untrue in the moment. So it's just a reminder, this new piece of audio, of that history, which has disappeared as these investigations and legal cases were disappeared.
Emily, what's your chatter?
One of my sisters is trying to help me come up with happy chatters and has been sending me stories about...
Which sister? Is it one of the sisters that I know?
I don't know all of them. It's my sister, Dana.
Okay. Good job, Dana.
Yeah. So a friend of Dana's who live in London has been talking to her about how British children are falling in love with Paddington Bear, familiar from children's books, star of new musical in London in which the bear is on stage played by a short, grown up in a bear suit, but the facial movements are being controlled by somebody else and are able to make it look like really Paddington has facial expressions and is singing in a way that is apparently beguiling. I learned from this that, which I guess is kind of obvious, but I didn't know that Michael Bond, the author of the books, was invoking Jewish children who were transported from
oh my God.
Right, from Germany
to
God. England to save some of them as the Holocaust was beginning. This is called the Kindertransport. And the Jewish children, I think, arrive sometimes with like tags around their necks, as does Paddington Bear. So yeah, I thought
holy
that was
cow,
like
I can't believe I've never thought about that.
I had exactly the same feeling.
I used to read those. I lived in London as a schoolboy and used to read those books as a kid in London and never, wow.
Yeah.
Eyes
so
opened.
If we can't all go see the musical in London, which I cannot, we can all have a little marmalade this holiday season and think of Paddington Bear.
My chatter is about a book that we probably talked about on the GabFest, and maybe even we did a GabFest Reads on, Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, a cautionary tale of power, greed, and lost idealism. So it's a book that came out earlier this year about Sarah Wynne Williams' experience at Facebook, and much talked about at the time. Facebook pursued legal injunctions to try to prevent her from promoting it. And I just have been reading it. It's a really, really, really good book. It's really, really good. And the parts on Facebook confirm all that you feel about Facebook. But I really want to recommend it because it begins with one of the most incredible stories I've ever read in anyone's memoir ever, about her as a child and an incident where she was bitten by a shark. And so you're like, well, she's from New Zealand, so maybe that happens to everyone. It probably happens to everyone in New Zealand that you get bitten by a shark. But
it's a rite of passage.
I really hope not.
It's just a story about what happened when she got bitten by a shark, and it's not really about the shark bite. It's about what happened with her family, and it's an incredible story. It's just like you read that story and you feel like, wow, this is a person I really want to know a lot more about. So check out Careless People. Great, really good memoir. Listeners, please keep the chatters coming. Please email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Your listener chatter, what you're talking about, what you're reading, what has struck you. And our listener chatter this week comes from a long way away, from Sana in Ukraine.
Hi, my name is Sanna Thorén Björling. I am a journalist myself from Sweden, and unless that disqualifies me from contributing, I will be happy to share my cocktail chatter. I discovered your podcast during my time as a US correspondent around 10 years ago when I lived in DC, and I have followed it since, as I do my best to keep up with American politics. Right now, though, I am busy reporting from another country. I am currently based in Ukraine and now listen while walking the streets of the beautiful city of Kiev. My chatter is about how new realities force adaptation and innovation, but also shed light on today's absurdities. I was recently at a conference run by the organization Arm Women Now that was founded by a member of the Ukrainian parliament, working to create female military uniforms and security gear suitable for women. The place was packed. I then interviewed Irina Nikorek, the politician, on her work, and she told me how women in the Ukrainian defense, currently around 70,000 women serve there, now have the right to clothes and equipment that fit. At the beginning of the war, women would line up to enroll and get large boxer shorts and boots like 10 sizes larger than their feet that they just had to put up with. That gave me the amazing image in my head, thinking of the reaction if thousands of men were getting panties and dresses with comments like, yeah, they might be a little tight, but you can always cut it in the side. That will do. You'll lose a few pounds anyway. Imagine that. As a final twist, I can add that most NATO countries still don't have female uniforms. With that, have a good weekend. Cheers and skål.
Thank you.
Amazing. That was great. And thank you for listening.
We're not the only Slate podcast this week. Imagine if we were. Sad.
People would be bereft.
You might also want to check out ICYMI, how millennial cringe became millennial optimism. Millennial cringe became millennial optimism. Those are hard words to say if you're not a millennial. On this episode, the host Kate Lindsay is joined by Gen Z expert and after-school writer Casey Lewis to talk about how Gen Z TikTok users are switching up on millennials. And they, after years of mocking millennials for being cringe, now they are finding the charm in millennials. Isn't it funny that millennials are now seen as the old generation? We're so old that we are thoroughly irrelevant. That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. This is one that is worth paying for. You can get early access to our Conundrum show a week before everyone else. It was an epic show in New York. Stephen Colbert just brought it. There is a reason why the man is one of the great entertainers of the world, known as one of the great entertainers. He is one of the great entertainers of the world. He was singing.
Had so much fun.
And he finally and most fully, thanks to the wisdom of David Plotz, answers the question about whether he should run for president or not.
Yes, he did answer the question about whether he would run for president. Yeah, that was we made big news. Emily made us see Simon and Garfunkel in a whole new light. John had moments on the floor.
Literally.
It was a great night. And that you can get, if you're a Slate Plus member, you can get that early. You can get that now. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait until Christmas to get it.
You left out that you had the best answer to sending 5 words into the future from the past.
Oh,
into our present from the past.
Send 5 words into the past to save the future. Anyway, if you are a Slate Plus member, thank you. Enjoy that episode. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. Do it today. Get this, listen to it early. You'll have a blast with it. That's our show for today. The Political Gabfest is produced by Nina Porzucki. Our researchers, Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Mila Bell, Executive Producer of Slate Podcast. Hillary Fry is Editor-in-Chief of Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week, but we actually already taped that. That was the conundrum, but it will be next week unless you're a Slate Plus member.
We will still be talking to you next week.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're loading up the old cannon for next year too with talking.